Neighbor Horror Stories. Story 1. By Jordan. When I moved into the building, I was honestly just happy to finally have my own place. After years of sharing apartments, cramped dorms, and even sleeping on a couch for a few months, getting the keys to a small one-bedroom on the third floor of a quiet residential complex felt like winning the lottery. It wasn't anything fancy, white walls, creaky floors, and that constant hum from the fridge that sounded like a distant plane, but it was mine. The building was old. You could tell just by the way sound traveled through the pipes or how the lights flickered a little too long when you flipped the switch. But it had charm. At least, that's what the real estate agent told me. Vintage charm, she said. I didn't care. I was just relieved to get out of my last situation. My new place was at the end of the hallway, apartment 3C. Just across from me was 3D, with a dark green door and an old metal peephole that looked rusted around the edges. The hallway wasn't long, just 6 apartments total on the floor, but it always felt quieter than it should have been. I didn't hear neighbors arguing, no kids playing, no music or TVs through the walls. At first, I thought it was a blessing. I met a few neighbors the first week. Mostly quick nods or forced smiles in the stairwell. The couple in 3A seemed friendly. A woman with a little dog lived in 3B. But I never met the person in 3D. And yet, I noticed things. Every time I walked down the hallway, just as I passed 3D, the door would close. Not slam or creak, just a soft click. As if it had been slightly open. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence. Maybe the door didn't latch properly. Maybe wind from a window created suction. I made excuses. But after the 5th or 6th time, it started to feel intentional. I became aware of it, like I could sense when I was being watched. I'd glance at that peephole, half expecting an eye to blink back at me. It got to a point where I'd try to walk quietly past it, or even take out my keys early so I could get into my place without stopping right in front of 3D. But I always felt it, that invisible weight on the back of my neck. Things got weirder when I started noticing small changes in my apartment. My kitchen window would be unlocked in the morning, even though I always made sure to latch it. One night, I came home from work and found my bathroom light on. I live alone. I turned it off that morning. At least, I think I did. I kept doubting myself. I even started taking pictures before leaving for work, lights off, windows locked, just to prove I wasn't losing it. Then came the peephole. One night, I was watching TV, lights dimmed, just half zoning out after a long day. I'd muted the commercials and was scrolling through my phone when I noticed a strange flicker on my front door. A tiny red glow. Like an LED. I got up slowly and walked toward it, crouching down to look through my peephole. Nothing. Just the empty hallway. But when I leaned back, I saw it again, the red flicker. It was coming from the peephole itself. I turned off all the lights inside my apartment and waited. After a few minutes, the red glow came back. I got close enough to realize what it was, a camera. Someone had replaced the standard peephole on my door with a digital lens. From the inside, it looked like a normal viewer. But from the outside, someone had access. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to seem paranoid. Maybe it was a new security feature? Maybe the building installed it without telling me? But the thing is, I know my peephole was normal when I moved in. I remember looking through it on the first night, checking out the hallway while I waited for the food delivery guy. I unscrewed it that night. It took me about 5 minutes, using a butter knife and a pair of tweezers. It came out clean, no wires, just a simple lens. But taped on the back of the lens was a tiny sticker with a QR code and a brand name I didn't recognize. I looked it up on my phone. It was a model of peephole camera that could be remotely accessed through an app. Sold online. Discreet. Marketed as a nanny viewer or home security solution. Except I never bought it. I never installed it. I barely slept that night. I kept waking up every hour, checking the door, listening for footsteps. The hallway was dead quiet, as always. But the silence didn't comfort me anymore. The next day, I left work early and stopped at a hardware store. I bought a basic metal peephole, a motion detector, and one of those little magnetic alarms that beeps when a door opens. I installed everything before the sun went down. The hallway light outside 3D flickered a lot. I hadn't noticed it before. I stood in front of their door for a few seconds, listening. I was tempted to knock, just to see who lived there. But my chest tightened at the thought. The next few days were calm. No glowing lights, no signs of forced entry. I tried to convince myself it was over. Maybe it had just been a prank. Maybe the previous tenant had installed the camera and someone finally shut it off. I wanted to believe that. Until the note appeared. It was slipped under my door one evening. A small square piece of paper with neat handwriting. You moved the I, but I still see you. I stared at the note for a long time. My hands were shaking, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. I turned on every light in the apartment, checked every room, every closet, every corner. I didn't sleep that night either. The next morning, I asked the landlord who lived in 3D. He just shrugged and said, I think his name's Kyle or something. Keeps to himself. Pays on time. That was it. That was all I got. I waited until nightfall, then sat in the dark, just behind the peephole watching. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't make a sound. Around 2:14 a.m., I saw it. A shadow moved in front of my door. Someone knelt down. I couldn't see details, but I heard the rustle of paper sliding under the door. I counted to 20 before I moved. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty. But there was another note. Why don't you smile more when you're alone? That one broke something in me. I felt sick. I stayed up till morning, pacing, sweating, imagining cameras in my bathroom, in the vents, behind the light fixtures. I tore through the apartment like a madman, searching for anything suspicious. I didn't find anything, but I no longer trusted my own senses. A few days later, I noticed something even stranger. When I left my apartment, I'd sometimes hear the faintest sound, almost like breathing, coming from behind 3D's door. Not snoring, not sleep sounds, just shallow, measured breathing. As if someone was standing still, just on the other side, listening. I tested it once. I walked slowly down the hall, then stopped suddenly in front of 3D and crouched. No sound. I waited. After a few seconds, I heard a light scuff, like a foot shifting. They were there. Listening. One night, unable to take it anymore, I taped a piece of paper over the inside of my peephole, just in case. Then I sat in the living room and tried to focus on a movie. Around midnight, I heard the hallway door open. Someone moving. Slow, deliberate steps. Then silence. I approached the front door and stared through the peephole cover. Nothing. But I noticed something under the door. Another note? I picked it up. This one was different. It wasn't paper, it was a small photograph. A photo of me, sitting on my couch, watching TV. The exact moment from earlier that night. Same clothes. Same lighting. It was taken from inside my apartment. That night, I packed a bag and stayed at a friend's place. I didn't tell them why. I just said there was a leak in my ceiling or something. I was too embarrassed to explain. Too scared they'd think I was losing it. But I knew someone had been inside. When I came back a week later, nothing had changed. Everything was in its place. But there was a small object taped to the wall just inside the entrance. A little sticker with a smiley face drawn in pen. Right next to it, a tiny hole. Not drilled. Burned. And through it, I could feel cold air coming in. Like a tunnel. A passage. Maybe even a crawl space. I haven't found the courage to break open the wall. Not yet. But I hear things now, soft knocks coming from inside. Always in the middle of the night. Always 3 in a row. I sleep with the lights on. I barely leave the apartment. And I've started checking the peephole again. Because sometimes, just sometimes, I swear it moves. It's been 3 nights since I found the burned hole in the wall. I still haven't touched it. I tell myself I will, maybe tomorrow, maybe after work. But when the sun sets and that faint cold draft starts slipping through the hole like a whisper, I can't bring myself to get close. I feel like if I look inside, something will look back. I've developed routines to stay sane. I sleep with a flashlight under my pillow. I jam a chair under the doorknob every night. I leave the hallway light on just to see the shadows move if anyone walks past. But it's not enough. I know someone's still watching. Last night, I got home a little after 10. I'd gone out just to clear my head, grab a coffee, pretend to be normal for a few hours. When I reached my door, I found the smiley face sticker was gone. The tiny burned hole was still there, but the sticker vanished. In its place was something else, barely visible under the hallway light. A single word, etched into the wall in thin, messy letters. Look. I stood frozen. My keys still in my hand. That word, it felt like a command. An invitation. Adare. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at it. But eventually, I stepped inside, locked the door behind me, and sat on the floor in front of the hole. I stared at it. The longer I looked, the colder I felt, like the wall itself was exhaling. The hallway was dead silent. The entire building was silent. I pressed my ear to the wall. Nothing. But then from inside the hole, a faint high-pitched mechanical whir, like a tiny motor turning on. I jerked back. The sound stopped instantly. I barely slept. Again. This morning, I decided to call in sick. I didn't have the energy to lie, to pretend to function. I sat at the kitchen table most of the day, just waiting. Around noon, I heard footsteps outside. I got up quickly, peered through the peephole. No one. But when I looked down, another photo had been slid under the door. This one showed me sleeping, curled on my side, blanket half off, mouth slightly open. It was taken from above, from inside the room. I don't have a loft. No shelves or high furniture, just the ceiling. I tore through my apartment like a madman again, checking smoke detectors, light fixtures, every crack, every corner. I unscrewed the vent in my bedroom, half expecting to find a camera lens, or worse, a human eye staring back. Nothing. But the screws on the vent were different. Not mine. Too shiny. Too new. I grabbed a flashlight, stuck my head up into the narrow vent shaft. It was tight, only a few feet of space before the duct curved into darkness. I held the light steady and saw dust. Cobwebs. A bit of lint. And something metal. A tiny mount bolted to the corner of the vent. No camera attached, just the mount. As if it had been removed recently. I felt like I was going to vomit. I spent the rest of the day sitting on my bed, flashlight in hand, eyes darting between the vent and the door, waiting, breathing in panic. Then, just after 6 p.m., I heard a soft knock. 3 slow, deliberate taps. Not at the door. From inside the wall. I bolted out of the bedroom. I slammed the door shut, shoved my dresser in front of it. I didn't know what else to do. The knocking didn't continue. Not at first. But 5 minutes later, I heard it again. Not the same rhythm. A pattern now. Top, 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 top. Like Morse code. I don't know Morse. I refused to look it up. I didn't want to know what it said. I moved into the living room, curled up on the floor behind the couch, and just sat there, trying not to exist. My phone was dead. I hadn't charged it. Maybe on purpose. Maybe part of me didn't want a way out. Around midnight, I heard something soft against the front door. A slow dragging sound. I waited, breath held, muscles locked. Then the sound stopped. I finally found the courage to peek. Nothing outside. But a new note had been slid underneath. No words. Just a drawing. It was me, sitting on the floor behind the couch. Right there. The exact pose. It wasn't a photo. It was drawn by hand. But the details, they were perfect. Right down to the folds in my hoodie. The way I clutched the flashlight. I dropped the paper and backed away. Whoever it is, they're not just watching me. They're here. Inside the walls. Above the ceiling. In the vents. And they're studying me. I haven't left the apartment all day today. I don't trust the hallway. I don't trust the stairwell. I keep seeing that note in my mind. You moved the eye. But I still see you. What if it's not just 3D? What if it's not even about that apartment? What if this apartment was meant for watching? Like it's part of a bigger design. A viewing room. A stage. I'm scared to speak. Scared to sleep. Scared to move. The knocking hasn't stopped. It happens at random hours now. Always 3 taps. Sometimes closer together. Sometimes right behind me. Last night, it came from inside my closet. I opened it. Slowly. Nothing. But when I woke up this morning, a small note had been taped to the inside of the closet door. I like your new flashlight. I hadn't told anyone I bought one. No one could have seen it unless they were inside. Unless they were here. Unless they never left. And now I'm sitting in the dark again. Writing this down because I don't know what else to do. The vent is open again. And I think I heard breathing. I don't know how long I stared at the open vent. The flap of metal swayed slightly, like it had just been touched, or maybe caught a breeze. But there was no breeze in that apartment. No windows open. No airflow. Just stillness. I inched closer, flashlight in hand, the beam flickering against the jagged aluminum. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to stop, to turn around, to leave. But I couldn't. I had to know. I had to see what was in there. Or who. I stood on a chair and slowly lifted myself toward the vent. My fingers trembled as I pushed the flap open wider. The beam of my flashlight disappeared into the darkness beyond. The dust was thick, undisturbed in places, but uneven, like something had crawled through it recently. Smudges. Fingerprints. A trail. I hesitated. Then slowly, I shoved the flashlight inside, using my other hand to support myself against the wall. I saw metal tubing, wiring, and then a small circular opening at the end of the shaft. It looked like another vent exit, but it was missing the cover. I recognized what was beyond it. A hallway. Not mine, but inside the walls. Someone had built a passage through the infrastructure of the building. A narrow, hidden corridor that ran alongside the apartments. Close enough to see through the vents. To listen through the pipes. To watch through the peepholes. And it was still warm inside. Someone had been in there recently. I pulled back fast, nearly falling off the chair. I slammed the vent shut and dragged my bookshelf in front of it. Stupid, I know. Like that would stop someone who's been living in the walls. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak in the floor made me jump. Every groan of the building felt like footsteps. My flashlight died around 3 a.m., and I didn't dare turn on the lights. In the silence, I started hearing something new. Not knocking. Not breathing. Whispers. Faint. Almost like a radio between stations. Just on the edge of intelligible. Sometimes it sounded like my name. Sometimes it didn't sound like my name. Morning came, eventually. But I didn't open the curtains. I didn't eat. I didn't shower. I just sat, facing the door, waiting. By the afternoon, the apartment was quiet again. Until I saw it. A new photograph had been placed on the floor. Not slid under the door. Just there in the middle of the living room. I hadn't heard anyone come in. It showed me again. But this time, I wasn't asleep. I was standing. Shirtless. Brushing my teeth. The angle was impossible. Taken from inside the bathroom mirror. From behind the glass. I dropped it. I backed into the hallway, half expecting someone to leap from the ceiling. My skin was crawling. That night, I couldn't stay in the living room. I dragged my mattress into the kitchen and slept with my back against the fridge, knife in hand. I thought it would be safer. More enclosed. Fewer entry points. But I was wrong. I woke up around 2 a.m. The fridge light was on. Not the interior one. The control panel light, blinking in a strange sequence. Like someone had messed with the settings. Or reset it. I stepped forward and saw another note, stuck to the freezer door. I like the kitchen. It's cozy. I haven't left since. I mean, I want to. Every second I spend here, I feel myself unraveling. But I don't know what happens if I leave. What if he follows me? What if this thing, this person, this presence, is attached to me, not the place? Maybe I was chosen. Maybe this apartment isn't the only one wired like this. Sometimes I press my ear to the wall in the kitchen, and I swear I can hear someone whispering. Practicing. My voice. Story 2. By Sophie. When I first moved into the studio, it felt like a fresh start. It wasn't glamorous by any means. Just a small apartment on the top floor of a crumbling building near downtown. The walls were thin, the windows barely insulated, and the plumbing made the kind of noises that seemed designed to drive someone slowly insane. But the rent was cheap, and after a rough breakup and a job change, I wasn't in a position to be picky. I just needed a quiet place to clear my head. Zomme wäre tu Beate. The landlord was an older guy named Greg. Gruff but polite. He showed me around the place quickly, muttering something about the building being stubborn. I didn't really understand what that meant at the time. I was too focused on the idea of solitude. No roommates. No shared walls. Just a mattress on the floor, and the steady hum of the city outside. At first, things were fine. I started to settle into a rhythm, working remotely during the day, cooking simple meals at night, and watching whatever random shows I could find online until I drifted off. It wasn't much of a life, but it was stable. Predictable. Then, on the third night, I heard it. A soft, slow knock. Not at the door. Not on the walls. From the floor. It was around 3 a.m. I'd been half asleep when it happened, lying on my side with one arm tucked under the pillow. The sound was faint but distinct, 3 knocks, spaced evenly apart. Almost thoughtful. I sat up, confused, and listened. Silence. I stared down at the wooden floorboards beneath my mattress. They looked solid enough, scratched and worn with age, but nothing unusual. I tapped them lightly with my knuckles. Nothing. I told myself I'd imagined it. Maybe it was the building settling. My piepe beniatse floor. I had no real understanding of how old apartments were put together, so I figured it was just part of the stubbornness Greg mentioned. The next night, it happened again. Same time. Same RHYTHM. Sri Slo Knox. This time, I was fully awake, sitting on the edge of my bed, scrolling through my phone with the glow of the screen lighting up my face. The knocks came from directly beneath me, under the exact center of the room.
My body frotze.
I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just listened. Nothing followed. I got up and turned on the lights, trying to shake the unease. I walked around the room, pressing my foot down on the boards, checking for loose panels, anything that might explain the noise. Everything felt solid. The next morning, I asked the landlord if there was any crawl space or basement under my unit. He looked at me with this odd expression, like I'd asked something inappropriate. "There's just the attic above and the ceiling below," he said flatly.
"You're on the top floor, remember?"
"Yeah, but I thought I heard something under the floor," I said, trying to sound casual. He didn't respond right away. Then he said, "Old buildings make weird sounds, that's all.
Don't let it mess with your head."
That night, I slept with headphones in. I played white noise, ocean waves, anything to drown out the silence. But even through the sound, I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. This time, it felt closer. More deliberate. I started avoiding being in bed at that hour. I'd stay up until 4 or 5 a.m., pacing the room, cleaning, rearranging furniture, anything to stay busy. When I finally did sleep, it was with the lights on. A week passed, then 2. The knocks never stopped. Sometimes it was 3 in a row. Sometimes more. And they started varying in location. Sometimes under the mattress, sometimes by the foot of the bed, sometimes under the kitchen tiles. But always from below. One night, I stayed perfectly still and put my ear to the floor. The wood was cool against my skin. For a while, there was only silence. Then, faintly, I heard it. Breathing. Not mine.
Not like a ventilation sound or a machine hum.
It was rhythmic. Human.
A slow inhale. A shallow exhale.
I jerked back like the floor had shocked me. That was the night I moved the mattress. I dragged it across the room and placed it next to the front door, away from the center of the floor. Away from whatever was underneath.
I barely slept.
The next morning, I stared at the floor, trying to make sense of it. I took a screwdriver and pried up one of the loose boards near the center of the room. It creaked and groaned, but eventually lifted.
Beneath, nothing. Just darkness.
No pipes.
No insulation.
Just a hollow, lightless gap that seemed to stretch endlessly. I shined my phone flashlight inside, expecting to see concrete or at least the framework of the building. Instead, the light vanished. Like the space below swallowed it. I dropped the board and nailed it back down. I wanted to leave. I wanted to pack up my few things and get the hell out of there, even if it meant sleeping in my car. But something kept me there.
Curiosity, maybe.
Or the way that place made me feel like I was being watched. Not just from the floor, but from all sides. Like whatever was down there knew me now. A few nights later, I woke up to find a small piece of paper on my kitchen counter. I hadn't written it. I hadn't left any notes. It was folded neatly in half.
No envelope.
Just a single word written in shaky, pencil-drawn letters. Hello. I stared at it for a long time. I checked the windows, locked. The door, still deadbolt. No signs of a break-in.
No footprints.
No signs of forced entry. And yet somehow, someone had entered.
Left me a message.
I started staying at a cafe until it closed, returning only when I was too exhausted to care what happened. I stopped showering.
I barely ate.
The sound beneath the floor grew bolder, knocks turning into scratching, sometimes even dragging sounds, like fingernails across wood.
Then came the voice.
They were never loud.
Never clear.
Just muffled murmurs under the boards. Sometimes I thought I heard my own name. Sometimes it was laughter.
Soft and childlike. Almost joyful.
But always beneath me. I stopped sleeping altogether. The note wasn't the last one. Others followed.
I like your voice. You move a lot when you sleep.
Why did you nail it shut? Each note appeared in a different place.
On my pillow. Inside the fridge.
Once, even tucked into the front pocket of the jeans I swore I hadn't worn in days. Every time, I'd sit there, note in hand, heart pounding, ears straining for any sound of someone moving in the walls. But there was never anything. Just the floor and the quiet, and the certainty that someone was below. Eventually, I stopped responding to texts. I ignored calls from friends. I didn't want to explain. How could I? I think someone is living under my apartment floor.
It sounds insane.
And maybe I am. Maybe the solitude finally cracked something inside me. But then 2 nights ago, I woke up at 3:17 a.m. to find the mattress pushed back to the center of the room. I didn't move it. I know I didn't. It was lying perfectly aligned, exactly where it used to be, where the knocking had always come from. And sitting on top of the mattress was a new note. A drawing this time. Childlike. Crude.
A stickfiguren of hem e.
Sleeping. And beneath it, another stick figure. Smiling. Beneath the floor. I wanted to scream. To run. To tear through the hallway and never come back. But I couldn't move. Something had shifted in me. Like I'd passed a point of no return. This apartment, it wasn't just a place anymore. It was a trap. A stage. And I was the show. Last night, I tried something. I left the board in the center of the room slightly lifted, just enough to hear through the gap. I lay in the dark, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. I waited. At 3:08 a.m., I heard the knocks. Then the breathing. Then, a voice. Not a whisper. Not a murmur. Clear. You're awake. I didn't respond. Couldn't. But I knew it was waiting for me to. Tonight, I'm not sure what will happen. I haven't slept. I haven't eaten. I haven't blinked much either. The floor feels different beneath me. Almost soft. Like it's thinning. Like something is coming up. And I think I hear footsteps. Inside the floor. I should have left when I had the chance. I knew it. Deep down. But I stayed. Maybe part of me needed to see it through. To know if it was real. If I was losing my mind, or if something truly was beneath me. Last night, something changed. I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor next to the loose board, flashlight in one hand, a knife in the other. The flashlight barely worked anymore. It flickered if I held it too tight. The bulb had started to fade at the edges, leaving a soft halo instead of a beam. Around 2:50 a.m., I started hearing scratching again. Soft at first. Then more rhythmic. Like something trying to dig up. The board vibrated slightly. I froze. The air felt different, stale and humid, like someone had exhaled into a sealed space for too long. The smell followed, earth, mold, and something else. Something foul. Like rotting wood soaked in water. Then came the breathing. But it wasn't like before. It wasn't passive. It was excited. Faster. Hungrier. I pressed my ear against the floor again, like I'd done weeks earlier. I don't know why. Curiosity? Instinct? That's when I heard it. A whisper. Right next to the wood. As if someone's lips were brushing the underside of the plank. Can I come up now? I jumped back, knocking over the flashlight. It rolled across the floor, casting chaotic shadows over the walls. I clutched the knife tighter, hand shaking. The board moved. Not just a vibration this time. It shifted, lifted, by an inch. Maybe two. I saw fingers. Thin, pale fingers, their nails dark and cracked, slowly curling over the edge of the wood like a spider testing its surroundings. I didn't scream. I didn't move. The fingers stayed there for what felt like forever, just holding the edge. Not pushing. Not pulling. Then I heard it again. That voice. Low. Eager. I've been so patient. I backed toward the kitchen, careful not to make a sound. The knife felt useless now. Like a toy in my hand. I didn't sleep. I sat in the bathtub until the sun rose, curtain drawn, door locked, knees to my chest. When I finally came out, the floorboard was back in place. No sign of damage.
No fingerprints. No smell.
But on the mattress was another note. Taped gently to the pillow. I saw you. That's where I am now. Sitting on the edge of the tub again. Waiting for night to come. Waiting for the floor to move. I think if I talk back, it'll answer. I think it's waiting for me to say yes. Story 3. By Edward. When I bought the house, it felt like a bargain. A little two-bedroom on a quiet cul-de-sac in the suburbs, big enough for me and my dog Maxwell, with just enough yard space to pretend I cared about landscaping. It needed a bit of work, outdated kitchen, creaky floors, but I was in my early 30s, single, and tired of renting. It was time to settle in, paint some walls, and let Max run around without worrying about leash laws. The backyard was what really sold me. A decent stretch of overgrown grass, an old tool shed tucked in the back corner, and a tall wooden fence enclosing the entire perimeter. The left and right sides were fine, neighbors on each side with tidy lawns and the occasional barbecue. But the back fence was different. Taller than the rest. Older, warped from years of heat and rain, the wood gray and splintered. I figured it used to be a privacy fence. Just behind it, I could see the tip of a roof, low and flat, barely visible from my side. On moving day, I met the couple to the right, Lisa and Mark, nice people, late 40s, offered me lemonade before I'd even finished unloading the truck. The guy on the left, some retiree named Dale, waved once and went back to his garage full of tools. But I never saw anyone behind the fence. The house back there didn't seem to have windows facing mine. No lights at night, no noise, no car in the narrow alley that wrapped around the block. Just silence. Max didn't like the fence. From the first day, he'd sit in the backyard and stare at it. Not bark, not whine, just sit, eyes fixed on one particular section of the wood like he expected something to happen. Sometimes, late at night, he'd scratch at the back door and growl softly, his ears pinned back. I assumed it was raccoons, or maybe possums. The yard had been neglected before I moved in. The first time I heard the humming was 3 weeks after I'd settled in. It was a low buzz, like electricity, coming from the other side of the fence. I was out with Max around midnight, letting him do his business, when it started. I froze. It wasn't loud, but it was constant, a mechanical vibration, like a generator or old machinery powering up. Max stiffened beside me and let out a single sharp bark toward the fence. The sound stopped immediately. The silence that followed was heavier than before. I went back inside and tried to forget it. Didn't sleep well that night. A few days later, I ran into Lisa while taking out the trash and asked about the neighbor behind me. She hesitated. "You've got Mr. Rourke back there," she said slowly. "He keeps to himself." "Older guy?" I asked. She nodded. "Lived there forever. I don't think he's had visitors in years. You'll probably never see him." I pressed a little, asking if he was friendly, or if anyone ever talked to him. Lisa just smiled awkwardly and said, "I'd leave him be." I should have listened. That weekend, I trimmed the hedges and mowed the yard. While raking leaves near the fence, I noticed something strange, a small knot in the wood at eye level that looked like it had been worn down. When I leaned closer, I realized it wasn't a knot. It was a hole, roughly the size of a quarter, cleanly cut from the inside out. I crouched and peered through it. Nothing but darkness. The hole was too small to see much, but I could make out the top of a patchy lawn, maybe some dirt. No lights, no furniture, no garden tools. Just blank emptiness. I stood there for a while, trying to adjust my eyes, before Max started barking at something in the far corner of our yard and pulled me away. Later that night, I looked through the hole again. Still dark. I went inside, but curiosity stuck with me like a thorn under the skin. The next few nights, the humming returned. Always between midnight and 1 a.m. Always the same tone, same vibration. Not loud enough for a complaint, but just loud enough to feel intentional. Like it wanted to be noticed. One night, I stepped out with Max and caught a flicker of light coming from beneath the fence. Just a sliver, barely visible between the uneven boards. It pulsed once, then vanished. I stared at the fence for a long time after that. 2 days later, Max came inside from the backyard with something in his mouth. At first I thought it was a stick, but as he dropped it by my feet, I saw it was a bone. Long, thin, with both ends cracked. I froze. I'd seen animal bones before. Max had dragged up squirrel remains once, but this was different. Cleaner. Like it had been buried and then carefully dug up. The worst part was the smell. Not fresh rot. Something older. Fainter. Soil and decay. I wrapped the bone in a plastic bag and buried it in the garbage outside. I didn't want it in the house. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the hole in the fence. About how clean it was. Like someone had spent time making it just right, big enough to see through. To watch through. The following evening, I pushed a small metal hook through the hole, just to see how deep the fence was. It went through easily. Nothing pushed back. I left it there. The next morning, the hook was gone. In its place was something else. A small scrap of paper. I pulled it through carefully. It had 2 words, written in smudged black ink, "Stay inside." I felt cold all over. My hands trembled. I stared at the note for a long time, then crumpled it and shoved it in the kitchen drawer. I told myself it was some kind of prank. That maybe Dale had seen me messing with the fence and decided to mess back. But deep down, I knew it wasn't Dale. That night, I couldn't stop myself. I waited until 12:30 a.m., when the humming started again, and I went outside. I brought a chair and sat facing the fence, flashlight off. Max stood behind me, unusually quiet. After a few minutes, the humming stopped. And then I heard something else. Shuffling. Not footsteps exactly, something dragging. Slow. Deliberate. From the other side of the fence. I leaned forward, eyes locked on the hole. And then, just for a split second, I saw it. An eye. Wide, pale, pressed to the hole, staring directly into mine. I stumbled backward out of the chair and dropped the flashlight. Max barked once and bolted inside. By the time I scrambled to my feet and looked again, the eye was gone. But the humming started again. Louder. Angrier. I went inside and locked the doors. I didn't sleep. The next day, I told myself it didn't happen. That I'd imagined the eye. The humming. Everything. I tried to go about my day, worked, ate, took Max for a walk around the block instead of the backyard. But I couldn't shake the image. The eye wasn't normal. It didn't blink. Didn't flinch. It just watched. That night, I found another note. This time taped to my back door, just above the handle. I know the dog saw it. I didn't go outside again for 3 days. I kept the curtains closed, the lights dimmed. I took Max to the front yard for walks, avoided the back entirely. On the 4th night, Max started growling at the sliding glass door. When I looked out, I saw movement. The fence was swaying. Not in the wind. Not from rain. It was too controlled. Like someone was pushing against it from the other side, back and forth, slow and steady, testing the wood. I watched, frozen, as a single sliver cracked down one of the boards. Then another. The wood had been cut from the inside. They weren't just watching anymore. They were trying to get in. I boarded up the fence the next morning. Screwed thick plywood across the inside and stacked heavy bricks at the base. I didn't care if it looked ridiculous. That night, I heard the humming again. And for the first time, it was coming from my side of the fence. Somewhere in the yard, just past the tool shed, something was buzzing softly. Then I heard it, the sound of something digging. Max refused to go near the door. He whimpered and hid behind the couch. At 3:12 a.m., the digging stopped. I didn't check until sunrise. When I did, I found a small hole near the edge of the yard. Freshly turned dirt. And something poking out. A second bone. This one shorter. And next to it, another note, buried halfway in the soil. One for the dog. One for you. I didn't go to work the next day. I sat at the kitchen table with the curtains drawn, the note still clutched in my hand. My coffee went cold. Max refused to leave the living room, huddled on the rug with his nose buried under his paw. He wasn't just scared, he was shutting down. And honestly, so was I. I couldn't wrap my head around it. One for the dog. One for you. It didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise. Like whoever or whatever was behind that fence was done watching. Like this was the beginning of something else. Something worse. That night, I didn't even bother pretending to sleep. I sat in the dark, lights off, house silent. Waiting. At exactly 2:48 a.m., I heard the first noise. Not the humming this time. It was tapping. Soft. Delicate. Like fingernails against wood. Then the sound moved. It traveled along the length of the back fence, from left to right. Steady. Unbroken. Then it stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. And then the tapping started again, this time on my back door. I froze. My heart thudded so hard it made my ribs ache. Max didn't bark. He just whimpered and crawled under the table. The tapping continued. 5 slow taps. Then a pause. Then again. Like a rhythm. A signal. I didn't go to the door. I didn't look through the glass. I knew better by now. Whoever was out there didn't want to be seen. They wanted to be let in. I sat perfectly still until sunrise. When I finally opened the back door, I found something new. A wooden box. Handmade, crude, with splinters at the corners and no hinges. Just a lid. No note this time.
No markings.
I didn't want to open it. But I did. Inside was a single object. Max's collar. Clean. Untouched. But Max was still in the house, trembling in the corner. I checked his neck. The collar was gone.